Hello, I am that Rob Human, and this is part 0 of my series on mod development for Tabletop Playground. Before we get into what this series is going to cover, first let's establish some credibility, as tends to be the pattern for these sort of introductory videos. Like I said, I am that Rob Human. Rob is fine. What I do is I am a full-stack web developer. I have been so for about 10-ish years, so I'm pretty familiar with JavaScript and TypeScript and the ecosystem that surrounds it, which is what Tabletop Playground uses for its scripting. I'm also a 3D modeler and have been in the hobby capacity for about 15 years, so I'm no stranger to 3D asset creation and texturing and all that. And incidentally, I'm also a maker and have been for about 4 years. And by maker, I mean a maker of physical things too. 3D printing, laser cutting, machining, things like that. Not really relevant, but it's an interesting thing about me. So in terms of relevance, the things that I've done, I am the creator and maintainer of a few libraries related to Tabletop Playground, namely the Create TTPG package, rolls off the tongue beautifully. JSX in TTPG, and the TTPG Common Lib. It's great that I can't even pronounce the things that I've created. We're going to get into some of this in later videos, and these are some of the utilities that we'll be touching on because, well, I made them, I might as well teach them. They really do make things a little bit easier, in my opinion. Additionally, I am one of the people behind the Twilight Imperium 4 mod for TTPG. Daryl is the principal developer of that mod, but I help out in asset creation and tooling, so systems that Daryl and company use to develop and distribute the mod, I had a hand in creating. But in terms of scripting and actual mod development, Daryl's your man. I also have created and maintain the kdyards.com website. Now, how that is relevant is KDYards is a site that lets you create assets for Star Wars Armada. It's essentially a web interface where people can plug in values, hit go, and it spits out a texture that looks like that. It generates the cards from user input. And those cards are printable by the people or whatnot, and they can do whatever they want with it. They can even use it in Tabletop Playground if they so wish. But I bring this up because data-driven generation of assets is something I'm really familiar with, and one of the things that we'll be touching on in this series. So, why this series? For one of the things I want to drive home is complexity isn't a vice, by which I mean creating a mod for Tabletop Playground is non-trivial. It is a complex beast. I think that's a strength because, well, Tabletop Playground can do a lot. It's a complicated beast. It doesn't necessarily need to be insurmountable, though. I know it can be intimidating, but one of the things I'm hoping to alleviate here is, despite its complexity, it's actually a little bit simpler than most people think it is, once you understand how it works, which is why we're here. The other thing is, later on in the series, we're going to be getting into some advanced tooling, but part of that gets into iterating your mod can be the same thing as iterating your game, which is to say, a lot of mod developers tend to think of, or game developers tend to think of mod development for Tabletop Playground or any other virtual tabletop as an incidental side effect or a necessary step to prototyping. And yeah, it can help with rapid prototyping, no doubt, but these two do not necessarily need to be as decoupled as most people think. One of the things we're going to be getting into is how can iterating for your Tabletop Playground mod help you iterate your tabletop game in terms of asset creation or things like that. And additionally, is there a way to iterate your game and organize your game development process in such a way that a version of the mod just kind of falls out at the end? So with that in mind, some of the things we're going to be covering in future episodes are, setting up your workspace beyond just click and create package. There's some more advanced ways to do that make it easier to collaborate with people or to have it decoupled from Tabletop Playground itself. We'll then dive into a little bit of content creation within TTPG, and we'll cover things like what is a token object, what is a card object, where are all these switches and doodads. We'll then get into scripting in the basic ways, and whilst I don't plan on doing a JavaScript 101, we'll be touching on some of the things that you need to understand in order to know how to leverage JavaScript and TypeScript for Tabletop Playground. After that, we're going to get into more advanced topics on scripting, such as UI and whatnot. And after that, we're going to, kind of leave it up to you a little bit. One of the things that I want to do here is not to rely too much on cliche. I want this to be a little bit more conversational than a lecture. So if there's anything that you feel is confusing, particularly after you've watched the first 3 or 4 episodes, or things that you have found confusing already, if you've touched on TTBG and go, what? Let me know. Send a comment or whatnot, and we'll see if we can integrate that into this curriculum. After we cover some of those more advanced topics and whatnot, I hope to touch onto content and asset management, and that is, you've got all these cards and tokens and whatnot. What's a more meaningful way of organizing them and referencing them, both in terms of Tabletop Playground as well as maybe your physical game? And that leads into content creation the complex way. And this is that data-driven way to create objects in Tabletop Playground. This goes into perhaps there's a database that you have or are willing to develop, and how can we leverage that to not procedurally, but create the items in Tabletop Playground in an automated way? How can we leverage data that you've already got, or data that would be useful both for TTPG and not TTPG, to create content for TTPG? We'll get into that in later episodes of the series. So with that, if there are any questions, or if you're even confused on some of this introduction stuff, I am that Rob Human on most socials, in particular Blue Sky, or the site formerly known as Twitter. But in particular, I am actually on the Tabletop Playground Discord, and I'm more than willing and happy to get into any conversations or questions people have, or if you want any kind of step-by-step guide on how you do such a thing, feel free to hit me up on any of those, and we'll hash things out and maybe even cover it in this series, depending on how universally applicable your question is. So with that, episode 1, or part 1 of this series, should be coming out relatively soon if it's not already, so keep an eye out for that. Thanks.